Have you ever wondered why that person just won't leave your mind? Why, even as time passes, certain thoughts continue to revolve around someone in particular, as if an invisible force were drawing your consciousness toward that figure? Constantly thinking about someone might seem like a mere mental habit or even an emotional distraction. But what if this process hides a deeper calling, a spiritual sign, a mirror of your own unconscious trying to speak to you? In this video, we dive into the hidden layers of the mind and soul to understand what it truly means to think about someone incessantly. You'll discover how this may be linked to internal processes of healing, projection, and even intertwined destinies. If you feel there's something more behind these thoughts, write in the comments, "I acknowledge the message behind my thoughts." According to Carl Jung's analytical psychology, constantly thinking about someone is rarely just about the other person. Often, this persistent thought is a reflection of internal content that has yet to be fully recognized or integrated. One of the key concepts to understand this is projection. When we project, we transfer parts of our own psyche, parts that remain unconscious, onto someone else. The person occupying our thoughts might be carrying something that is actually our own, something that needs to be seen. Another essential concept is that of the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we reject or hide. When someone triggers intense emotions and comes to dominate our thoughts, it is possible that this figure is mirroring a repressed fragment of our identity. Recognizing this shadow is the first step toward inner transformation. This process can also indicate that we are on the path of individuation, the profound journey of self-knowledge and integration that leads to the maturation of the self. On this journey, recurring figures in our thoughts may appear as archetypes, living symbols pointing us towards something greater. Perhaps this person represents the archetype of a lover, a friend, a guide, or even a rival, bringing symbolic messages that need to be deciphered. Furthermore, Jung invites us to reflect on the anima and animus, the feminine and masculine aspects that dwell within our psyche. The figure that never leaves your mind might symbolize an encounter with these inner energies, signaling a call for reconciliation and balance. Thinking about someone in this sense can be more than just longing or obsession. It may be your soul trying to reveal what still needs to be healed, integrated, and recognized. At first glance, constantly thinking about someone might seem like an external, almost accidental phenomenon. However, from the perspective of Jung's analytical psychology, it is often a deep message coming from the unconscious. The human mind doesn't function merely as a passive receiver of reality. It organizes, interprets, and projects internal images onto the world, and especially onto other people. Projection is a symbolic language of the soul. When we project, we see in the other something that belongs to us, yet has not been acknowledged as our own. This dynamic is inevitable at the beginning of any emotional relationship. When we connect with someone, be it through love, admiration, anger, or fascination, we start projecting onto that person parts of our own psyche that remain unconscious. Thus, repeatedly thinking about someone can reflect the intensity of that projection. The other becomes a mirror, carrying traits, qualities, or wounds that we need to see in order to better understand ourselves. Jung states that every significant human encounter involves projection. When we are not aware of this, we become trapped in what he calls a projected complex, believing that the other is the source of a particular feeling or obsession when, in reality, it is what they represent internally for us that triggers all of this. Constantly thinking about someone may mean that that figure has activated an important psychic content, a message that the soul wants to bring to light. For instance, if someone we barely know starts to inhabit our thoughts, that person might be representing an internal archetypal image, such as the hero, the healer, the mother, or the traitor, and this archetype is being projected onto them. The constant thought then functions as a symbolic reminder that something within us needs to be understood. Ignoring this could lead to the unconscious repetition of patterns of idealization, frustration, or emotional dependency. The soul speaks in symbols, not in words, and the human figures that start to occupy our imagination, especially persistently, should be seen as living symbols. When we look at them with awareness, we can recover the energy that has been projected and reintegrate it into our inner world. This process is essential for psychic maturation and spiritual growth. A common mistake is trying to forcefully get rid of the thought or reduce it to a simple attraction or curiosity. Although desire may be present, projection often points to something deeper, a call from the soul to look inward. That recurring thought might be telling us, "This person represents something of yours that you need to reclaim." It could be courage, sensitivity, spontaneity, or even unresolved pain. True liberation does not come from eliminating the thought, but from understanding it. When we manage to identify what we are projecting, the thought begins to lose its compulsive power. It is no longer the other who imprisons us, but rather that part of ourselves that remains unintegrated. By reclaiming this projection, one starts to realize that what seemed to come from outside was, in fact, an inner movement awaiting consciousness. Thus, constantly thinking about someone can be seen as a spiritual phenomenon. It is the unconscious seeking to become conscious. It is the soul knocking at the door of the rational mind, asking for space to express itself. By responding to this call with presence and openness, we begin a process of healing and reconnection with our true self. Over time, the image of the other loses the magical glow of idealization and begins to occupy its rightful place. A symbol of transition, an unconscious teacher, a bridge inward. Obsession dissolves into understanding. What remains is a deeper sense of self, a more complete presence, and a profound clarity about the paths of the soul. In Jung's analytical psychology, the shadow encompasses all that we reject, deny, or hide from ourselves. It consists of repressed aspects of our personality, both negative and potentially positive, which, because they are not integrated into our consciousness, remain in the unconscious. When someone starts to occupy our thoughts persistently, that person may be embodying elements of our shadow. They appear as a psychic mirror, reflecting what we have yet to dare to see. Constantly thinking about someone, especially when accompanied by discomfort, anger, resentment, or exaggerated admiration, can be a clear indication that this figure is activating dormant parts of our psyche. Jung maintained that encountering the shadow is inevitable on the path of individuation, and it often emerges through another person. The other becomes a catalyst, a projected figure onto which we place everything we cannot admit in ourselves. For example, if someone disturbs us with their freedom, audacity, or sensuality, it may be that we are repressing these very qualities within us. Similarly, if someone fascinates us with their intelligence, calm, or leadership abilities, perhaps we are unconsciously desiring to incorporate these virtues that we do not recognize as our own. In this scenario, the shadow is not just a repository of traumas or negative traits. It also holds a creative, transformative potential that must be brought to light. When we repeatedly think about someone who has hurt, irritated, or confused us, our initial tendency is to attribute all the responsibility for this mental agitation to the other. However, in Jungian view, the discomfort reveals that something unresolved has been touched within us. That is why this person lingers in our mind. They are a messenger of the shadow, a sign that there is repressed content demanding to be seen, understood, and above all, integrated. The challenge lies in recognizing that the figure occupying our thoughts may not have the power we believe they possess. The power lies in our own psyche, in the force of what has been projected, and in the need to reintegrate that content. Jung warned that as long as we remain unaware of the shadow, it will continue to govern our lives, and we will mistakenly attribute it to fate. This is especially true for relationships marked by obsessive thinking, where the mind circles around someone as if trapped in a cycle. It is possible that this person represents an unresolved family pattern. They might activate childhood wounds, unconscious memories, or even aspects of emotional ancestry that remain alive within us. The shadow often does not come alone. It brings along unprocessed pain, unexpressed feelings, and avoided decisions. And the constant thought serves as an internal siren saying, "There's something here that needs to be addressed." The key to dealing with this is not to try to silence the mind, but to dive honestly into what is being revealed. Who is this person in your psychic story? What do they awaken in you that disturbs, fascinates, or confuses? Which part of you are they mirroring? These questions don't have simple answers, but exploring them can unleash an immense psychic energy capable of transforming pain into awareness and conflict into clarity. When we recognize the shadow and stop projecting it onto the other, the obsessive figure begins to lose its power. This doesn't mean denying or avoiding the feeling, but rather putting it in perspective. The person who once seemed to be the source of mental torment gradually becomes a symbol of something greater, an invitation to know yourself more deeply. Constantly thinking about someone then can be seen as a form of revelation. The shadow, when expressed through another, guides us toward healing. And when we accept it, it ceases to be a hidden enemy and becomes a bridge to our inner wholeness. When someone persistently occupies our thoughts, the explanation can go beyond repressed individual content or psychological projections. Jung viewed the psyche as both collective and deeply symbolic. In this sense, constantly thinking about someone may also be related to archetypal memories, unconscious bonds, and even spiritual connections that transcend time, space, and rational logic. Archetypes are universal images that live in the collective unconscious and shape our experiences, relationships, and perceptions. They are psychic structures common to humanity, manifesting in myths, dreams, symbols, and deep emotional bonds that connect us to certain people. When a figure repeatedly appears in our mind, it might be activating one of these archetypes within us. For example, someone could represent the archetype of the lover, the soulmate, the teacher, or even the enemy, and our unconscious recognizes this energy even if our conscious mind does not immediately understand it. Moreover, bonds can form on subtle levels of existence. Jung recognized the spiritual dimension of human experience and believed that some connections go beyond individual psychodynamics. In certain circumstances, constantly thinking about someone can reveal an energetic, spiritual, or even karmic link, reflecting shared experiences on a profound, often unconscious level. Such connections aren't necessarily explained by reason, but are intensely felt, as if an invisible thread united two souls in a mutual process of learning, healing, or transformation. These connections can emerge at specific moments in life, usually during significant internal transitions. The persistent appearance of a person in our thoughts may mark the beginning of a new psychic cycle, the awakening of an inner memory, or even the reunion with a forgotten aspect of our being. The figure of the other then transforms into a living symbol of what needs to be recovered, healed, or integrated. It's important to understand that these unconscious bonds do not always mean that the other person is aware of the same process. The connection may be happening internally as part of our individuation journey. However, when two people share a strong emotional, psychic, or spiritual resonance, there is the possibility that this exchange is somewhat reciprocal, even if unconsciously. Jung described this kind of phenomenon as synchronicity, when two events relate in a meaningful way without an apparent causal connection. For example, thinking of someone and then shortly after receiving a message from them might be a manifestation of this principle. These psychic encounters should not be confused with romanticized fantasies or desperate quests for external answers. They require discernment, introspection, and emotional responsibility. The fact that someone constantly appears in our mind does not necessarily mean we should pursue that person or that they have a predetermined role in our concrete life. Often, this image is there to point us toward an internal path, a symbolic process that must be lived. The person themselves may merely be the vehicle through which the unconscious attempts to communicate. Unconscious bonds can also carry emotional burdens from past lives, family patterns, or ancestral emotional legacies. Jung believed that the personal unconscious intertwines with the collective, and that many of our behaviors are influenced by forces far older than we imagine. It is possible that the person who won't leave our thoughts is linked to a psychic narrative that transcends our current history. Identifying this requires sensitivity, inner listening, and often therapeutic or spiritual work to access these deeper layers. Recognizing a spiritual or archetypal connection does not mean idealizing the other. Rather, it is about understanding what they represent on our journey. Each recurring figure can be a gateway inward, an invitation to transformation and the awakening of something essential that still lies dormant within us. Constantly thinking about someone may be the beginning of a journey where the other is not the destination, but the sign that indicates the direction. By looking at these thoughts with reverence without fear or judgment, we begin to decipher the symbolic map that the soul offers us. And it is there that meaning is revealed, not as an external answer, but as inner wisdom that guides us toward the true encounter with ourselves. At first glance, constantly thinking about someone might seem like a mere emotional restlessness. However, under the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, this phenomenon may reveal something much deeper, a call for individuation. This central concept in Jungian work refers to the process of becoming who we truly are, that is, integrating all aspects of the psyche, both conscious and unconscious, into a living, authentic wholeness. On this path, everything that deeply affects us plays a role, including the persistent presence of someone in our thoughts. Individuation is not an ideal of perfection, but rather a continuous process of inner reconciliation. Jung believed that unintegrated psychic content emerges in various symbolic forms, often through dreams, impulses, symptoms, or recurring thoughts. When a person continually appears in our mind, it might be because they symbolize an aspect of the psyche that is trying to emerge. This someone becomes a key, not necessarily because of who they are objectively, but because of what they represent in our inner world. It is common that during this process, the unconscious brings forth figures that act as bridges between the ego and the self, the deepest part of the psyche representing the totality of our being. The person who lingers in our thoughts may symbolize an archetype that needs to be integrated: the lover, the sage, the wounded child, the inner guide. The constant mental focus reveals that something has been activated, something that asks to be examined more deeply, not outside of us, but within. This individuation process requires courage, as it demands confronting the shadow, dismantling projections, and listening to what truly lies behind the persistent thought. Sometimes, the other represents a repressed desire, an unhealed wound, or even an untapped potential. In other words, they may be the external image of a part of us that is being called to consciousness. The tendency is to fixate on the person, but the task is to examine what they mirror. That is why many emotionally or mentally intense relationships serve as catalysts for profound transformations, not because they are destined in a romantic sense, but because they provoke an internal reorganization. Constantly thinking about someone may be the beginning of a journey to integrate parts that were once divided: reason and emotion, strength and vulnerability, masculine and feminine, past and present. This call for integration is an invitation to psychic maturity. Jung shows us that individuation does not happen in isolation, but through encounters with the other. The relationship with that figure who occupies our thoughts can be the symbolic setting where inner dramas take shape and gain consciousness. Even if the concrete interaction does not exist or was brief, the psychic bond is real and powerful because it mobilizes archetypal forces within us. And it is in this mobilization that the opportunity for growth arises. However, it is important not to confuse this call with a desperate search for external answers. Obsession with the other is a sign that psychic energy is still projected and that there is inner work to be done. In this context, that persistent thought is a symptom of something more essential, the need to find oneself. Individuation begins when we stop seeking outside what can only be found within. When we manage to withdraw the projection and understand the symbol that the other represents, we create space for a new kind of relationship with ourselves. The persistent thought dissolves, not because it vanishes, but because it is re-signified. The person ceases to be an enigma or an unbearable absence and comes to be seen as an emissary of the psyche, a call from the self to consciousness. It is at this point that true transformation begins. Integrating the content symbolized by the other means, recognizing that the mental image was, in reality, a reflection of ourselves. And this recognition does not distance us from the world. On the contrary, it brings us closer to life with greater wholeness, clarity, and authenticity. The presence of the other in our thoughts thus becomes a bridge inward, and the path of individuation reveals itself as a vibrant, pulsating, deeply spiritual journey. Constantly thinking about someone might seem like mere mental noise, an emotional discomfort, or even a senseless coincidence. But when we look through the eyes of the soul, we realize that this thought is, in fact, an invitation, a silent call to dive into the deepest layers of our being, where the shadow, projections, archetypes, and the self reside. The person who insists on occupying our thoughts is often a symbol. And by decoding that symbol, we not only come to understand the other, we come to understand ourselves. This path is demanding. It asks us for the courage to face what is hidden, the maturity to withdraw projections, and the sensitivity to embrace what still hurts. But it is also a path of liberation. The true answer is never found in the other, but in what the other awakens within us. If this content touched something within you, subscribe to the channel and enable notifications. This helps YouTube understand that you value deep reflections. And if you want to continue this journey, click on the video appearing on your screen now. It will further expand your understanding of the symbolic universe of the mind. Remember, everything that touches you deeply wants to transform you.